back in October, and we announced our first demand to the school board. We're going to get into what that demand actually was here in a minute. And we also went out to Portland, Oregon to Teaching with a Purpose conference, which is all about culturally relevant curriculum. They hosted Mr. Chris Edmond, who has a book out we'll talk about a little later. It also hosted Gloria Ladson Billings. She was there. And there was a number of other hip-hop ed that incorporates hip-hop pedagogy into the school system and curriculum. Then in November, we were able, from our understanding at the initial school board meeting at the announcement, we were able to talk to the policy committee and present to the policy committee the implementation that we were after in our first demand, which we're going to talk about here in a second. Then we fast forward to January of 2017. It looks like our campaign has been effective because the school board recently approved $8,000 worth of fifth grade culturally relevant books. We were also on the DSC membership hall spotlight. And as you can see now, we're also giving our webinar. At the end of February, we're going to be hosting a online educator of Afrocentric education for a Warrior Healer Builder Super Weekend, and he'll be talking on a number of topics in regards to Afrocentric education, healing, and other topics as well, telling the story of Araminta Harriet Tubman, who was going to be on the $20 bill next year. So to talk about our campaign policy recommendations, we wanted to start with demand number one. Our policy recommendations, again, is based on the demographic of our school district, which is over 70% African American or Black. And this is based on the principle that school buildings and curriculum, what's being taught in that school building, should be reflective of the culture of the students that attend. So our policy recommendations to be included in Dayton Public School policy was that it be made mandatory for all seventh graders and above schools that have 75% or more Black or African American student population to implement the 2 books into the language arts curriculum. The first book being Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington, and the second book being Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. And essentially, when I say 75% or more, schools that are 75% or more Black or African American, I'm talking about a whole half of the side of town, the whole half of the school district buildings. So Booker T. Washington, the first book Up From Slavery, Booker T. Washington was an educator, one of the most foremost African American leaders of the late 19th and early 20th century. He founded the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, now known today as Tuskegee University. Mr. Booker T. Washington was actually born in slavery in Virginia, and he put himself through school and became a teacher after the Civil War. In 1881, he founded the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute in Alabama, which grew immensely and focused on training African Americans in agricultural pursuits. Under Booker T. Washington's leadership, Tuskegee became a leading school in the country, and at his death, it had more than 100 well-equipped buildings, over 1,500 students, a 200-member faculty teaching 38 trades and professions, and a nearly $2 million endowment. Not bad for a man that just came up out of slavery. So this is a significant book to the history of that student population in our school district. There's a picture of Tuskegee University, which we can attend today. And many know about the Tuskegee Airmen, who contributed to the greatness of this country. And there's another picture of Tuskegee University. Now, the second book in our demands that we are seeking to be made policy in our school district is by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. And Dr. Carter G. Woodson was an African-American writer and historian known as the father of Black History Month. He was born in 1875 in New Canton, Virginia, and is one of the first African-Americans to receive a doctorate from Harvard. Dr. Woodson dedicated his career to the field of African-American history and lobbied extensively to establish Black History Month as a nationwide institution. He wrote many historical works, including the 1933 book, the miseducation of the Negro. In 1915, Dr. Woodson helped found the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, which later became the Association for the Study of Afro-American Life and History, which had the goal of placing African-American historical contributions front and center. The next year, Dr. Woodson established the Journal of Negro History, a scholarly publication. Dr. Carter G. Woodson is well known for this great work, The Miseducation of the Negro, and we're going to talk about that a little later because Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings actually mentioned that book that we all should read as well. And again, it's important to note that this demand is reflective of the student population within the school building. The history, the culture of the specific building matches the curriculums that are provided in the book. We also provided with these books, we provided the superintendent and the curriculum director lesson plans from reputable professionals for each book. So that gave them a basis of which to direct dialogue with the students. So at that point, we can open up for question and answer.
Yeah, this is Nancy again. For whoever has any questions, you can raise your hand or you can type in your question under the chat box. So I'll wait a few seconds to see if there are any participants who have any questions. On the control panel, you can raise your hand. You'll see a little hand. You just click on that and I'll see the alert. I see one hand from Tajal Cartwright. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I will unmute you and you can ask your question now. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Hi.
Hi.
So my name is Tejal Cartwright. I was wondering, when you guys presented this curriculum to the DPS, like how was it received? I know you said that they contributed $8,000 to, I think it was $8,000 to a small portion of the curriculum, but did they give you guys an idea of like future investments or what they were willing to do from this point forward?
Yes, thank you for that question. It's been well received. I think the message is really hard to dispute as far as the truth. So it was well received. The curriculum director is new. The superintendent is new as well. She's from Chicago, and they implemented a curriculum specifically directed to African American population in Chicago. So she was saying that she wants to see that implemented in DPS. So again, we've had positive talks, and with Gloria Ladson Billings being here recently, then I think that they'll move forward. But it's well received. Like I said, no real pushback because it's really hard to dispute.
Yeah, that's great.
Like I said, it's important based on the population of the district.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I don't see any other hands raised for questions at this moment. And in the question field, I don't see any, actually. Sorry about that. So there's a question from Lori Clark out of North Carolina. How were the books chosen to be integrated into the curriculum?
That was really from my personal experience. To be quite honest, I'm very disappointed as a college graduate that certain books I was unable to read until I was 30. I shouldn't say unable, but the school system didn't make me read these books. I mean, I went all the way through college and I read up from slavery as a 30-year-old, and the effect that it had on me, the picture that it painted visually in my mind, and I knew that this was something that younger people need to have at an earlier age. So again, they were really personal, and also we kind of had to start somewhere. There's not a lot of people setting a template out here doing this work around curriculum, so it was kind of like we had to start somewhere also.
Great. And we have another question from Janice Harper in Mississippi. I think you answered a little bit about it regarding your superintendent, but I'll read her question. Maybe there's something you want to add. How receptive were the superintendent in terms of lessons plans provided? Also speak to any challenges, barriers in your campaign.
The superintendent didn't say a lot about it, quite honestly, the lesson plans, but the curriculum director actually delved into it. And so she's actually passing them on. Like I said, they're professionally done by PhDs. Um, so again, hard to refute. So the curriculum director delved into it, and they're actually in the process, according to the director, that they're going to be making professional development around those two books so that they can be implemented in the school policy for next year in the school curriculum. And so difficulty, it's really the greatest difficulty, I would say, again, that there's no template. I don't really. There are other people that have done certain things, but as far as work around changing curriculum in school districts, I haven't run into other individuals. So that's the biggest challenge. I say. I think that I'm really in my own way, blazing my own trail.
Great, and we have one more question from Cher Roman from Sisters and Brothers United in New York City. Would you consider books written by Black women to add to the curriculum?
Absolutely. I mean, you can't have anything without the Black woman, quite honestly. But absolutely.
Great, thank you. I'm going to check.
Maya Angelou comes to mind. How could you have a library, a Black library, without Maya Angelou?
Definitely. So I don't see any other questions so far. So if you'd like to resume with your presentation, you can go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm going to pass it off to our great comrade in the Dignity in Schools campaign, Lynn Morton. She is a restorative justice trainer and practitioner. She's the founder of the Austin Peace Center and the founder and executive director of the Women of God's Design. And she's going to be talking about restorative justice and culture. So, sis, you have it.
With a story.
Hi, Lynn. I think you came in a little late. Can you start again?
Oh, you couldn't hear me? I'm sorry.
It's
Good
okay.
evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here, but I want to start us off with a story. It's a story that I use most often when I'm opening up my circle trainings. It says, the Bembe people make their home in an area in South Africa. This tribe has a social structure with an elementary criminal code. Their close community living makes harshness unnecessary. They are so close-knit, in fact, that bad behavior is quite infrequent. When someone does do something unjust, work stops throughout the village. The person is placed alone in the center of the village. The rest of the tribe comes and surrounds him. Then each person of every age begins to talk out loud to the accused. One at a time, each person tells all the good things that one in the center ever did in his or her lifetime. Every incident, every experience that can be recalled with any detail and accuracy is recounted. All positive attributes, good deeds, strengths, kindnesses are recited carefully and at length. No one is permitted to fabricate, exaggerate, or be facetious about the accomplishments or positive aspects of the accused person. The tribal ceremony often lasts several days, not ceasing until everyone is drained of every positive comment that can be mustered. At the end of the tribal circle, a joyous celebration takes place, and the person is symbolically and literally welcomed back into the tribe. When we hear that story, it is the perfect example of what a restorative process looks like. When you look at the official definition, which the term restorative justice was just coined in the 70s, 76, 75. So it's a relatively new phrase. And when we look at the definition of restorative justice by Howard Zerr, it says that it's a philosophy that is focused on the belief that those affected by harm can work together to repair it, and that collective effort leads to true accountability. So when we look at restorative justice, and when I look at restorative justice, and specifically the circle process, I look at it from its historical origins for my people and for our people. Circles and restorative justice, when you look at it in writings, in most writings, you see that it is attributed to First Nations people, indigenous people, but within the practices of restorative justice, there is a deep connection with those in Africa, our people in Africa, especially when we come into the process of facilitating the circle. The circle in itself starts with us seated in circle and creating the foundation for dialogue, which comes to us through storytelling. And we look at the tradition of African storytelling, and we see that we have this tradition of passing down our stories from generation to generation to generation. In West Africa, the storyteller is called a griot. The griot is the person that holds the story, shares the story, and shares the history. When we come into circle, we all become the griot because we are the expert of our own story. Now, historically, in the African tradition, the griot is used not only to pass down the stories and the history, but if it is a well-to-do family, each family would have their own griot, and their griot would be the person that would mediate if there was ever anything conflict related. The griot would then mediate the conflict. The griot would set up the marital arrangements or anything of that nature, because that was the person that held the story. That was the person that held the key to what the families wanted, if you will. So when we come into circle and we're talking about restorative justice in circles and culture, when we are in schools that are full of our children, black and brown children, we need to be in a place where we bring them back to our culture. When we talk in circle and we sit in circle, we need to begin to impart into our children that this is the way we used to do, and come back to this place of doing what we know is right. As a child growing up with families from the South, this is how I learned about circles. My grandparents didn't have the term restorative justice. They had the term of, this is how we pass down stories. This is how we pass down history. So when we look at the practice of restorative justice, we look at it from the history of the person who is involved. How do we solve the problem? We look through the history to say what caused the actions that you're now here for, and build upon that to move forward towards the future. When we look at oral history and how we get to this, once we have that circle process in place and we have the griot in place, this then begins to build community capacity. Because once we learn from one family what's going on with them, we can then build on that to better the community, because we now have a baseline of what's going on in the community from this particular family. So I want us to, well, as I do as a practitioner, not just look at restorative justice for what it is said it is, but look at it from the historical connection between the continent of Africa and where we are in our public school system and juvenile justice system today. if anyone have any questions. Nancy, do we have anybody that have any specific question as it relates to circles and culture?
No, I was just checking that now. No questions so far. Oh,
Okay.
actually, sorry. I'm sorry. There is one. I just came up. From Zakia, with Racial Justice Now in Dayton, Ohio, is there any pushback from others on this approach?
Yes. I've actually had someone to tell me that I shouldn't, express those connections between my African heritage and the practice of circles. They actually told me not to do it. And of
what?
course, I
Yeah,
have
so
not listened.
okay. Great. I wanted to know what your response has been.
My response is simply, how can I teach someone without teaching it from a historical standpoint? That this is not something that I just made up yesterday, that this is actually a legitimate way of being in relationship with people, and it has a historical basis.
Great. We have quite a few questions for you, Lynn. Here's another one from Lee. What are the nature of the circles you've conducted in the schools?
Hey, and Nancy,
Yes.
if we wanted to hold on to those until
Okay.
we're going to have another question and answer section.
Sure.
And so if anybody wanted to write those questions down, we're going to be doing that right at the end before we wrap up.
Okay, great.
Sound good?
Great. Okay.
Okay. So we're going to keep moving here. Like I said, we're going to have another question and answer session after this section here. We wanted to share. We talked about Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings, who was coined that phrase or that theory, culturally relevant teaching. She was just here in town in 2016, going back. Racial Justice Now made demands around the city of Dayton proposed tax increases for universal preschool, and one of the demands was for culturally relevant curriculum. And the CEO of Learn to Earn, which is driving this initiative, responded to RJN's suggestion to consult with Gloria Ladson Billings, who actually, like I said, was just here last week. And she was here addressing this new informational release talking about Know the Gap, Close the Gap, that showed our county-wide education issues. And unfortunately, black boys were at the very bottom, black girls right above them, but they don't address necessarily the societal and other issues that led to these situations. But that's just something we wanted to share, again, with Gloria Ladson Billings being here and, again, being a part of our campaign. So we want to talk briefly, and again, these last slides are just giving you some things to think about in the context of culturally relevant curriculum. When we talked about culture, we gave a long definition earlier, again, to really give you something to sink your teeth into. These PowerPoint slides are available. If you want to contact me, you can have these for your own use. But the elements of culture academically is broken down into 7 parts. Culture being social organization, how you organize yourselves in your community, whether families or tribes or clans, different customs and traditions, something like Super Bowl weekend or 4th of July, of course, religion, part of culture, language, a part of culture, your national language, your societal language, your family's language, and of course, in education, we have to ask, is your language being respected in schools? A part of culture, we're talking about art and literature, also forms of government, and also economic systems. All of those are parts of elements of culture, but what they dig deeper into is simply the values that people hold. So when we look at culture and we talk about it as being a part of our education system, we're really looking at the values of that community or the values of that school building, determining what exactly that culture represents. Now, one person that we want to talk about, again, the research, one person that's well known is Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu. Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu is the author of over 25 books, including national bestsellers. He's an educational consultant who is constantly traveling on the lecture circuit with over 30 different workshops addressing students, school districts, parents, teachers, and community residents. You can see he addresses some of the things that are heavily on my mind in the context of this culturally relevant curriculum campaign, such as learning styles and how the classroom is set up. If you go back to how the education system initially started, and how we take breaks in the summer based upon agrarian culture and bringing in the harvest. You know, the classroom setup with rows and seats. You know, this is very archaic. It's not modern into the way that our children are comfortable and are used to learning. Also, learning styles are cultural. You know, some cultures find themselves very kinesthetic, hands-on. Some cultures are like a lot of movement. Some are very audio. But again, those learning styles have to be addressed in this culturally relevant curriculum, and that's something that Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu talks about in his books. One thing I found in the research that I found was very moving and very important in the context of culturally relevant curriculum is the idea of centering children. And when I talk about centering, I go to the professor Molefi Asante with his theory of Afrocentricity. And it's Dr. Molefi Kete Asante, who is a professor and chair of the Department of African American Studies at Temple University, which is in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He is considered by his peers to be one of the most distinguished contemporary scholars. He's published over 77 books. He became the chair of the African American Studies program at Temple, where he created the first PhD program in African American Studies, and that was in 1987. He's directed more than 140 PhD dissertations. He's written more than 550 articles and essays for journals, books, and magazines, and he is the founder of the theory of Afrocentricity. And I want to read to you just a little bit from an article, which again I will make available to you. And this article about Afrocentricity, he talks about centering children, making sure that a child is centered in their own culture. And so just to read a little bit from this book, is from Educational Leadership Journal from 1991 and 1992. And he says in it, the discovery of the centric idea was a major breakthrough in my educational conceptualization. It allowed me to explain what happens to white children who attend American schools, what happens to Asian children who are rooted in Asian culture and attended schools in their countries, what happens to the children of the African continent who are grounded in their own culture and attend their own schools. In my 17 journeys to Africa during the past 20 years, I visited schools and colleges in all parts of the continent and been impressed with the earnestness of children to learn. Back home in Philadelphia, I wanted to explore why children in Africa seem more motivated than African American children here. Why did Africans on the continent learn 4 and 5 languages when in some schools African American children were not often encouraged to take even one foreign language? To say the least, I have been disturbed by the lack of direction and confidence that plague many African American children. I believe it is because they are not culturally centered and empowered in their classroom. And that's, again, his theory of being centered in your own culture and history. And something that is very important that he emphasizes is that, again, that centering of a children, that treating each person's heritage with respect, and studying, learning about each other as a way to make a sense of yourself, but also the world. But again, I'm gonna make that article available for all that to read it. There's a lot that he says in there. I'm just touching the surface. Secondly, talking about the research, I want to talk about a great man and researcher, Mr. Pedro Ribeiro. We're going to quote him from an article titled from the National Youth at Risk Journal. This is back from 2015. And again, I can make this available to you. And it's an interview with Pedro Ribeiro titled How to Help Students and Schools in Poverty. Now, one of the questions he is asked, and I have it here for you, it says, how can teachers incorporate popular culture such as hip-hop music and so on into the curriculum to motivate students and to make it more relevant to them? He says, not all teachers are familiar with the popular culture, the music, the songs, the video games, and the television shows that the kids are familiar with. If you are, then you can in fact use these things as a way to build connections with kids and build connections with the curriculum and your students. For example, I had a former student who used to use hip-hop as a way to introduce literature to kids. Before introducing them to Hamlet, he would have kids read a poem by Tupac Shakur that the rapper wrote about his mother, because he knew that this would help them relate to Hamlet, who was also going through a lot of issues and concerns with his mother. But teachers who are not as familiar with popular culture and who do not share the same background with the kids, I would say what they have to go do is to work to try and learn about the students and find out what their interests are, what do they care about. This is important for building connections with kids. The key is building relationships. When we can do this, it makes learning more accessible to students, and students become really willing to participate and be as invested as learners. Again, that's very significant. We can dig deeper into that at another time, but we can make that available for you if you would like to have that. So I would say in conclusion, we are fighting against the school to prison pipeline. And so I asked that question, what does the culturally relevant curriculum and culturally responsive schools have to do with the school to prison pipeline? Well, it's just as Malefi Asante said, that a child that is interested in his curriculum, that sees themselves in the curriculum or as part of the curriculum, that child is drawn to school, and that child has desire to be there, is a less of a disciplinary problem, is more of a question asker. And so many students see school and education as white. CNN highlighted this a few years back, that many students see school as a foreign place that acts and carries out a culture opposite to their own. So they see education as white, and they have therefore checked out of the classroom. And they're not creating what I look at as lifelong learners. And it's important to understand that children must be interested in school as opposed to repelled. And when they see their own culture in the school system, they can do absolutely that. So I'm going to take it back to you, Nancy. I know there was a number of questions for Lynn to answer, and so we can get right into that portion.
Great, thank you. I started with Lee's question, what are the nature of the circles you conducted in schools, Lynn?
Okay. In schools thus far, I have facilitated circles for anything you can imagine. Domestic violence, gang interactions, and those gang interactions just so happen to be some Latino boys against some African American boys. So we have touched on that cultural piece within the circles. Something as simple as a shove in the hallway, lunchroom fights, anything that could possibly happen in school. I've had circles where I facilitated circles with some sixth grade girls and one of their teachers. So anything that could happen in schools, I've had a circle.
Great, thank you. And there's another question from Maria, and she'd like to ask you about the culture of poverty where the families are rejected and isolated within their community. I think it's in relation to the circles and perhaps reaching these communities.
And if that is the direction in reaching those communities, it goes, for me, it goes to the love of the people that I am supposed to be in service to. When we talk about our communities don't trust the schools. A lot of times we can't get parents to come into the school. I have had to become that go-between person between the schools, where I would actually walk to someone's house and have a conversation with them on the front porch to in turn get them to come to the school. So reaching them for me is a matter of love for people and a love for my people. I don't believe there is anybody that I could not reach, because I will go to where they are to make it happen.
Great, thanks, Lynn. Lisa Moore asked a question, and I unmuted you, Lisa, if you're still on. If you'd like to ask, you had typed in your question, but I'll allow you to ask Lynn yourself. You could do that now. Lisa, are you there? Okay, well, I'll just read it aloud. Why are we not holding Africa countries responsible for restorative justice?
Why are we not holding them responsible? Specifically in South Africa, there is a movement towards restorative justice in the criminal justice system. So they are now using restorative justice and regaining some of the culture that was lost. And let me try, I can find the website really quick where you can look at that.
Great. Yeah, we can share some of those resources
Okay.
to really post the call.
Okay,
I'll move on to the next question. What about, and this is from Tracy Mallory, what about current parental values and how they solve problems? How do the expectations of circles connect with what's happening at home?
When you are in circle, one of the first things you do in circle before you have any deep conversation is you create your values for your time together. If we are in a circle with some young people who sometimes they may have a little different sense of value, that's one of the things we talk about first before we can get into any issues, to create a system. I don't want to use the word system. What's the word I want to use? A sense of being together in the school. Now, we have to make the distinction between school and home. If we're trying to be a restorative school and your family life does not reflect those values of being restorative and being in relationship with people, we have to then talk to those young people on that level and create a separation, help them to create a separation from what they do at home to what they do in school. And some of it, what the values are at home, obviously do cross over into the school. I hope that answers what you're asking.
Great, thank you, Lynn. And the previous question, you got to it a little bit, but Maria resent it. How do we come together surrounded by the family that is isolated and rejected by their community? How do we build upon this family to understand the culture of poverty? Because most of the kids are punished at school because they bring their culture into the school.
Okay, once again, it goes back to building that culture within the school. And that's also going to take, it's going to take more than a circle in the school. We can't just do everything with the children and leave the family out. That's something that I'm having a little bit of a battle with CPS, with Chicago Public Schools. You cannot say you're building a restorative environment when you're not bringing everybody into the environment. You need to have people in place who are willing to go to those parents who feel like the school pushed them away. The school, they don't trust the school. They don't trust anybody in the school. We have to be willing to go beyond that school building to ensure that we are building that process for the children within the school. We can't just say we're going to sit in a circle with the kids and their family is just out there, just wherever. when I first started the Peace Center, the Austin Peace Center, I was very well aware that there were issues in the homes, but my task was to start this Peace Center and get fighting down to a minimum. But I quickly realized you cannot help the child if you're not willing to help the family. And when you find out what those needs are for the family, it's our role to help the family. That's just the Lynn view.
Great, thanks for that. And I know a few people, I have some more questions, but I know a few people raised their hands and submitted questions in the question field. We have Derek Brumfield who asked a question. What I'm going to do, Derek, is unmute you. You're unmuted and you can ask Lynn questions directly.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Okay. I had, well, basically two questions. So, is the circle method a restorative practice you teach, or do you only facilitate this? And if so, is there an explanation on how to properly do this? Well, recreate this method.
Yes, circles are deemed a restorative practice, and yes, I do teach circles, and yes, there is a proper way to facilitate a circle. What you can, if you want to just read something on the circle process, you can. It's called The Little Book of Circle Process by Kay Pranis. She is actually one of the people that actually trained me. And that's
what is it called again? I'm sorry.
The Little Book of Restorative. No, I'm sorry. The Little Book of Circle Process.
Okay.
Nancy, is it a way we could like send a list of books or something out to people who were on the webinar?
Definitely. I think for resources, we'll definitely send out an email. You'll get an email of the recorded webinar to share as well if you have friends or colleagues who missed this webinar. And in that email, we'll include the resources.
And if I could, right quick, could you give me the author of this book again, please?
Kay Pranis. Kaypranis.
Okay, thank you.
Now, don't look for anything about the African culture in that book now, because it's not there. It's just going to give you the process.
Well, this is
process
good
to facilitate circles.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for that question, Derek. Okay, we also had another participant who raised their hand. Tracy Mallory, I don't know if we got to your question already, but I will unmute you if you have. Tracy, are you there?
My question was answered. Thank you.
Okay, of course. Thank you. And then we also have another follow-up question from Zakia in Ohio. Zakia, you've been unmuted if you'd like to ask your question.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I had a question around the culture of poverty. I wanted to know if the person who's asking that question could clarify and unpack what they mean by culture of poverty. I just want to make sure it means the same thing that I think it means. So, but I want to hear it from the person that asked the question to make sure I'm understanding.
I'm going to look again. That was Maria. Let me unmute you, Maria, if you want to just answer and clarify. You're unmuted. Would you like to answer that, Maria?
I can't speak. I have a sore throat.
Okay. Well, if you want to answer that in the chat box, you can do so, and then I can read it out loud.
Yeah, that's apologies.
Sure. Okay, we'll get back to you, Zakia, on that answer.
Okay, thanks.
And okay, we have another question from Janice Harper in Mississippi. Is there help from the faith-based community in terms of the circles?
Is there help from the faith-based community? those of us who are in the faith-based community that know about circles are very open and receptive to the process. I think it's with anything else, there has to be more promoting the learning about circles and the circle process and just restorative justice overall to gain that support. But those of us here in Chicago that know about circles, they are very, very supportive. There are pastors who are getting teams of their members trained as circle keepers.
Great, thank you. And we also have a couple more questions. This one's from Lori Clark in North Carolina. Are you available on an on-call basis, or do you have trainers at each school?
The schools that we are at, we have a certain schedule where we have circle keepers in the school in regards to the Peace Center. Most of that is from open of the building to the close of the building, where I have circle keepers in those buildings. I am also right now being asked to build a model where we can have something, teams that are on call to come to schools for certain situations. So I'm looking at that and in the process of building that.
Great, thank you. And we have about a minute left for the webinar, so I will try to get to a couple more questions. One more from Janice Harper. In the circles, do you bring parents and students together, or are there different level circles just for adults?
Yes, depending on the circle and the continuation of the circle, part of the philosophy of the practices of restorative justice is bringing the whole community, everyone that was affected by the harm, into the circles. So yes, I do facilitate circles with parents and children. I facilitate circles parent to parent, or I facilitate circles children to children. So it depends on the situation and what we're calling for at the moment.
Thank you. And as we're running out of time, Zakia, just to let you know, Maria wrote back to your question about clarifications of culture of poverty. This was the response. The culture of poverty is when families from generations live in extreme poverty and they have to struggle day by day to live and raise their children. A house where 20 people would live and sleep wherever they can. The child needs to raise his voice to be heard within the family, and the response sometimes is not what we accept in our society. For example, they would curse and they would curse at school and were expelled for cursing, for fighting, or talking back. That's the response. Zakia, I'll unmute you if you have any other clarifying questions before we close out the webinar.
No, thank you.
Great. So I think our time is up. I want to thank everyone who joined the webinar, and especially our two facilitators, Hashim Jabbar of the West Dayton Youth Task Force and Racial Justice Now in Dayton, Ohio, and Lynn Morton from the Women of God's Design in Chicago. Any last words before we close off the webinar, Lynn or Hashim?
You can find out more information about our culturally relevant curriculum campaign at RJ in Ohio. I can be contacted at hajbar@rjinohio.org. And if you wanted to get the PowerPoint, we can send that out through Nancy, or you can send me an email at hajbar@rjinohio.org.
Great, thanks everyone for joining, and look out for an email with a recorded webinar and the resources we discussed on the webinar. We'll have a few more of these in collaboration with our members, so look out for them, and have a good night. Thank you.